Almost every ancient civilization on Earth shared one universal obsession. Long before humans built cities, wrote laws, or invented the wheel, our ancestors were brewing, fermenting, and consuming alcohol. In fact, some of the most radical archaeologists in the world believe that humans did not invent agriculture to bake bread. We built the first farms, settled down, and created civilization, specifically to brew beer. Our love affair with alcohol is not a modern cultural invention. It is an ancient evolutionary adaptation written 10 million years deep into our DNA. From drunken prehistoric primates scavenging fermented forest fruits to the sacred beer hymns of ancient Sumer and the golden wines of pharaohs, this is the true story of how humanity first discovered alcohol. To discover when humans first consumed alcohol, we must travel back 10 million years. Long before the first Homo sapiens walked the earth, our ape ancestors lived in the treetops. In the canopy, primates ate fresh, crisp, unripe fruits directly from branches. However, around 10 million years ago, a dramatic climate shift cooled the planet. Thick tropical rainforests shrank, and fruit on branches became increasingly scarce. Ape ancestors were forced to descend from the safety of the trees to the forest floor. On the forest floor lay mountains of fallen, overripe, decaying fruits. When sweet fruits drop to the warm, moist soil, microscopic wild yeasts invade their sugary pulp. The yeasts gorge on fruit sugars, converting them into ethanol alcohol through natural fermentation. In nature, alcohol serves as an airborne olfactory billboard. Ethanol is a lightweight, volatile molecule that travels miles through dense forest breezes. For a hungry primate on the forest floor, the smell of alcohol meant one thing: rich, calorie-dense food is right here. Fermented fruit had higher sugar availability and was easier to digest than raw fruit. There was only one massive biological obstacle: alcohol is a natural metabolic poison. In high concentrations, ethanol causes severe liver toxicity, motor paralysis, and intoxication. An intoxicated ape on the ground was an easy, defenseless meal for saber-toothed predators. Around 10 million years ago, a miracle mutation occurred in our common ancestor. Evolutionary biologist Matthew Carrigan discovered that our ADH4 enzyme underwent a single-letter mutation. This mutation made the ADH4 enzyme 40 times faster at breaking down ethanol in the stomach. Our ancestors could now gorge on piles of fermented forest fruits without getting dangerously drunk. This evolutionary breakthrough is known as the drunken monkey hypothesis. The ability to metabolize alcohol provided our ancestors with an immense survival advantage. It allowed them to exploit a massive, uncontested food source that other animals couldn't touch. We didn't learn to drink alcohol. Our bodies evolved to seek it out as vital food. For millions of years, this natural scavenging relationship continued peacefully. Then, as human intelligence and tool-making exploded in the late Stone Age, our ancestors moved from simply finding fermented fruit to intentionally making it. The world's first intentional alcoholic beverage was almost certainly mead, fermented honey water. Honey is the most concentrated source of pure sugar in the natural world. In the wild, water occasionally flooded into a hollow tree trunk containing an abandoned beehive. Wild airborne yeasts settled onto the diluted honey water and began fermenting it naturally. A passing Paleolithic hunter smelled the heavenly intoxicating floral aroma, dipped a hollow horn or shell into the golden liquid, and took a drink. It was sweet, bubbly, warming, and filled his mind with euphoric courage. He brought a container of this magical liquid back to the campfire. The clan shared the drink under the starry sky, laughing, dancing, and bonding. They realized they could recreate this magic anytime. Just mix honey and water in a pouch and wait. Mead became the sacred beverage of prehistoric European and African nomads. Yet, wild honey was rare, dangerous to harvest from cliffside hives, and seasonal. Humanity needed a more abundant, everyday source of fermentable sugars, and they found it in the wild cereal grasses growing on the hillsides of the Near East. Around 13,000 BCE, on Mount Carmel in modern Israel, a semi-nomadic culture of hunter-gatherers called the Natufians made history. In 2018, archaeologists excavating Rakafet Cave made a monumental discovery. Deep bedrock mortars carved into the stone floor contained 13,000-year-old residues of beer. This was 13,000 years ago, thousands of years before the invention of farming. The Natufians were brewing sophisticated craft beer while still living as hunter-gatherers. How did Stone Age Natufians brew beer without metal pots, stoves, or thermometers? Brewing beer is a complex, multi-step biochemical engineering process. First, you cannot simply ferment raw grain kernels. Starch does not ferment into alcohol. Yeasts can only eat simple sugars, not complex, tightly locked starch chains. The brewer must perform a biological miracle called malting. The Natufians soaked wild wheat and barley kernels in water and let them sprout. As the seed sprouts, the plant's own internal enzymes, called amylases, wake up. The grain converts its own starch into rich, sweet, fermentable maltose sugars. Then, the brewers dried the sprouted malt over gentle smoke to stop the growth. Next came the mashing phase, crushing the malt and heating it in water. Because they had no fireproof ceramic pots, they used stone boiling. They heated smooth granite stones in a fire until they were red hot, and dropped the glowing stones directly into the water-filled mortar. The intense heat extracted all the sweet sugars from the crushed grain into a rich broth. Finally, the sweet liquid was left in open stone basins to cool. Wild yeasts floating in the air settled on the warm liquid and began an active feast. Within 3 days, the sugary porridge transformed into a thick, frothy, nutritious beer. Ancient Natufian beer was not a clear, fizzy yellow beverage like modern lagers. It was thick, cloudy, slightly sour, and had the consistency of a warm liquid porridge. It was packed with B vitamins, essential amino acids, proteins, and calories. It was both food and drink simultaneously, liquid bread, and it had an alcohol content of roughly 3 to 4%. Why did Natufian hunter-gatherers invest hundreds of hours into brewing beer? Because beer was the ultimate social glue of ancient humanity. Archaeologists found that Rakfet Cave was used for seasonal funeral feasts. When a beloved elder died, neighboring bands gathered at the cave to mourn and honor them. Brewing beer for the funeral feast created a profound shared ritual experience. The alcohol relaxed social tensions, lowered inhibitions, and built unbreakable alliances. Beer transformed separate, suspicious hunting bands into a united regional culture. And this social power of beer explains the greatest mystery in archaeology, the mystery of Göbekli Tepe. Built in southeastern Turkey around 9,500 BCE, Göbekli Tepe is the world's oldest temple. It was constructed by nomadic hunter-gatherers thousands of years before cities existed. Inside the stone enclosures, archaeologists discovered massive stone troughs. These stone vats had capacities of up to 160 liters each. Chemical tests of the stone residues revealed high concentrations of calcium oxalate. Beer stone is the unmistakable chemical fingerprint of cereal fermentation. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were throwing massive, multi-day beer festivals. To carve and erect 20-ton stone pillars without slavery or money, you had to provide the ultimate incentive: unlimited roasted meat and cold, frothy beer. Beer was the economic currency that built the world's first architecture. And this led to the famous beer before bread hypothesis. For decades, historians assumed humans domesticated wheat to bake daily bread. Anthropologists Brian Hayden and Solomon Katz proposed a radical counter-theory. Gathering wild wheat by hand was exhausting, tedious, and yielded very little flour. Nobody was going to invent farming, clear forests, and break their backs for boring porridge. But for a beverage that produced euphoria, divine connection, and social glory, for that, humans were willing to invent agriculture. The desire for beer drove our ancestors to plant the first permanent crops. We didn't invent farming to fill our stomachs with bread. We invented farming to fill our hearts with joy and our cups with beer. And the brewing revolution was about to spread across the entire planet. While people in the Near East were brewing barley beer in stone mortars, an entirely independent brewing revolution was taking place in ancient East Asia. In the village of Jiahu, dating to 7,000 BCE, 9,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered intact pottery jars containing the world's oldest chemical cocktail. Archaeochemist Patrick McGovern of the University of Pennsylvania analyzed the ceramic residues using advanced liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry. He discovered that 9,000 years ago, the villagers of Jiahu were master mixologists. They had created a sophisticated multi-ingredient fermented hybrid beverage. The base of the drink was wild rice, providing fermentable starches. Because rice starch is difficult to break down into sugars, the Chinese invented an extraordinary biological catalyst, Q, or mold starter. They cultivated beneficial aspergillus molds on moistened grain cakes. The mold produced enzymes that broke down rice starch into sweet fermentable glucose. To add natural sugars and wild yeasts, they added wild mountain honey. And for acidity, flavor, and natural tartaric acid, they added wild hawthorn fruit and wild grapes. The result was an intensely flavorful, sweet and sour aromatic alcoholic beverage. It was 10% alcohol by volume, as strong as modern wine, and it was consumed during sacred shamanic rituals, accompanied by music. Archaeologists at Jiahu found the world's oldest playable flutes, made from the wing bones of red-crowned cranes. The villagers drank their sacred rice-honey wine while listening to the haunting melodies of crane flutes. Wine and music were born together as twin portals to the spiritual world. In ancient China, alcohol was known as ju, a divine sacred libation. It was strictly reserved for communicating with the spirits of departed ancestors. During the Shang and Zhou dynasties, kings commissioned magnificent bronze wine vessels. These bronze vessels, weighing hundreds of kilograms, were the ultimate symbols of imperial power. Across the Pacific Ocean, in the Americas, indigenous civilizations discovered their own sacred brews. In ancient Mexico, indigenous peoples tapped the giant wild agave plant. They carved into the heart of the agave to collect the sweet sap called aguamiel. Aguamiel fermented within hours into pulque, a milky, viscous, frothy, sacred drink. Pulque was revered as the gift of the goddess Mayahuel, who was depicted with 400 breasts. Only priests, elders, and sacrificial participants were permitted to drink it. In the Andes Mountains of South America, indigenous women invented chicha. Chicha is a traditional beer made from malted Andean maize corn. To break down the tough cornstarch into fermentable sugars, women chewed the corn flour and moistened it with their own saliva. Human saliva contains high concentrations of salivary amylase enzymes. The chewed corn dough was boiled in large clay pots and fermented for 3 days. Chicha was the lifeblood of the mighty Inca Empire. The Inca emperor drank chicha from golden goblets called carros and distributed millions of liters of chicha to commoners in exchange for road-building labor. Every single complex civilization on Earth independently invented its own alcoholic beverage. In tropical Africa, it was palm wine tapped from wild palm trees. In the Eurasian steppes, it was kumis, fermented mare's milk. Humans fermented whatever sugar or starch was available in their local environment. Alcohol was not an accident. It was a universal human imperative, and nowhere was alcohol more central to daily survival than in the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia, where beer was about to become the official salary of every working citizen. In ancient Sumer, 5,000 years ago, beer was not a luxury. It was a daily necessity. The waters of the Tigris and Euphrates were muddy, stagnant, and teeming with lethal parasites. Drinking untreated river water in a crowded city of 50,000 was a death sentence. Beer, on the other hand, was completely safe to drink. The brewing process involved boiling water, which killed all waterborne pathogens. The alcohol content and acidic pH of fermentation prevented dangerous bacteria from growing. In the ancient world, people who drank beer survived. People who drank water died. Sumerian society elevated beer brewing to a sacred divine science. The goddess of beer was Ninkasi, literally the lady who fills the mouth. Around 1800 BCE, Sumerian scribes etched the famous hymn to Ninkasi into clay tablets. The hymn to Ninkasi is not just a religious prayer. It is the world's oldest brewing recipe. The hymn describes baking a special twice-baked malted barley bread called bapir. Bapir bread was dense, dry, and could be stored for months without spoiling. Whenever you needed to brew beer, you crumbled the bapir bread into water, mixed it with sweet date syrup, and let the mixture ferment inside large clay vats. The hymn proudly sings, "Ninkasi, you are the one who pours out the filtered beer of the vat." It is like the onrush of the Tigris and Euphrates. Sumerians drank their beer using long, slender drinking straws made of reeds or gold. Because ancient beer was unfiltered, thick mash and grain husks floated on top. The long straw reached the clean, filtered beer at the very bottom of the pot, while keeping the floating grain husks out of the drinker's mouth. In the royal tombs of Queen Puabi of Ur, dating to 2600 BCE, archaeologists uncovered a 5-foot drinking straw made of solid gold and lapis lazuli. Even royalty drank beer through straws together from a shared central jar. Drinking through straws from a shared jar was the ultimate ancient symbol of trust. You could not poison a drink that both people were drinking simultaneously. Beer was also the standard currency of the entire Mesopotamian economy. In the Sumerian city of Uruk, the world's oldest written document is a pay stub for beer. Common laborers received 2 liters of beer per day as their standard wage. High-ranking officials and priests received up to 5 liters of strong beer a day. In ancient Egypt, the entire workforce that built the Great Pyramids of Giza was paid in a daily ration of 4 to 5 liters of nutritious beer. Egyptian beer, called hekt, was thick, sweet, and low in alcohol. It provided the 3,000 daily calories needed to haul 2-ton limestone blocks. Archaeologists excavating the workers' village at Giza found massive industrial bakeries and breweries. Without daily beer rations, the Great Pyramids could never have been built. If a pharaoh ran out of beer, the workers downed their tools and went on strike. In 1170 BCE, during the reign of Ramses III, the tomb workers of Deir el-Medina staged the first recorded labor strike in human history because their beer rations were late. The pharaoh's ministers rushed emergency shipments of beer to the village to resume work. Beer was the fuel of empire, the safety of water, and the foundation of social peace. And alongside beer, another miraculous beverage was conquering the hills of the Near East, the noble art of wine. In the rugged mountains of Georgia, Armenia, and the Zagros of Iran, humans discovered how to ferment the sweet juice of the wild grapevine, Vitis vinifera, at Arini One cave in Armenia, dating to 4100 BCE. Archaeologists excavated the world's oldest fully functioning winery. They found a large stone press for stomping grapes with bare feet, dozens of buried ceramic fermentation jars, and fossilized grape seeds and skins. From the Caucasus Mountains, the art of viticulture spread across the Mediterranean. In ancient Greece, wine was elevated from a mere beverage into the core of philosophy. The Greeks created the institution of the symposium, literally, drinking together. However, the Greeks considered drinking undiluted wine to be the height of barbarism. Only barbarians and wild beasts drank pure, unmixed wine. Civilized citizens always mixed their wine with 3 parts spring water in a crater. Diluting wine kept the alcohol content around 4 to 5%, allowing philosophers to drink for 8 hours while remaining witty, sharp, and eloquent. The Greek god of wine was Dionysus, god of ecstasy, liberation, and divine madness. Dionysus represented the dual nature of alcohol. It could liberate the creative soul and break down social barriers, or it could unleash chaotic madness, violence, and destruction. The Greeks understood that alcohol was a potent, dangerous psychological medicine. When the Roman Republic conquered Greece, they industrialized wine on a scale never seen before. The Romans planted vineyards from the sun-drenched hills of Spain to the valleys of the Rhine. Every single citizen of Rome, from Emperor Augustus to the humblest slave, drank wine every single day of their lives. The Roman economy was completely lubricated by wine trade. At Monte Testaccio in Rome, there is a literal mountain made of 53 million broken wine jars. The premier vintage of the ancient world was Falernian wine, grown near Mount Vesuvius. Falernian was so strong and alcoholic that ancient writers claimed it could be lit with a flame. It was aged for 20 to 30 years until it turned a deep, dark amber color. Meanwhile, in northern Europe, Celtic and Germanic tribes worshipped beer and mead. The Roman historian Tacitus noted with amusement that Germanic tribes debated all important tribal decisions twice, once when drunk and once when sober. They believed that drinking mead revealed a man's true, unvarnished character, and that no one could lie or disguise their intentions while intoxicated. Then, during the Islamic Golden Age in the 8th century CE, scientists in the Middle East invented the ultimate transformation of alcohol, the technology of distillation. Muslim chemist Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber, perfected the alembic still, from the Arabic word al-inbik. By heating wine and cooling the vapors, he discovered that alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water. The condensed liquid was a pure, high-proof spirit. Al-Kul, the origin of the word alcohol. Originally, distilled alcohol was used strictly as an antiseptic medicine and solvent. Physicians called it aqua vitae, literally the water of life. They believed it could preserve youth, ward off plagues, and cure every known ailment. By the late Middle Ages, distillation technology spread into European monasteries and towns. In Ireland and Scotland, monks distilled malted barley beer into whisky bitha, whiskey. In France, winemakers distilled grape wine into eau de vie and brandy. In Russia and Poland, distillers used rye grain and potatoes to create vodka. In the Caribbean, sugarcane molasses was distilled into rum. And in Holland, distillers infused neutral grain spirit with juniper berries to create gin. Distilled spirits completely revolutionized global trade, naval exploration, and warfare. High-proof spirits never spoiled on long ocean voyages, unlike water and beer. Navies issued daily rations of rum and grog to keep sailors healthy and obedient. Alcohol had journeyed from a scavenged piece of rotting jungle fruit.